This is the point in the show that I introduce our guest analyst, who is here for the rest of the program and who will give us his personal take on the news and issues of the day. And tonight, I'm joined in the studio by Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper, Mahmood Jega. Thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you.
You were obviously watching the people talking from the beginning of the program. What do you make of the points our first guest, Dele Farotimi, spokesman of the P2B campaign, made at the outset, and how it compares with what you're seeing and hearing in this campaign?
He's a very eloquent man, and he made some very interesting points. The main message about Nigerians are ready to drive out the old political guard and change is everyone's hope, but we will see whether that will happen. He made some other interesting points along the way, like about the buying of votes. It's a serious problem which honestly the Electoral Commission alone may not be able to combat, although he did say something very practical, that is, don't allow people to go into the polling booths with telephones, because they have to photograph their ballot paper and show it to the sponsors in order to be able to claim the prize. Now, if that is the case, then it will be very good really to prevent. And I remember in previous elections there were efforts to really prevent people, even though, you know, these days it's difficult to tell people to keep their phones aside. But on the whole, he made...
And you're not going to strip search them, are you?
That is the issue.
You don't know.
Very difficult, yes.
And why do you think vote buying appears to be on the rise? I mean, INEC suggests that it is because the voting system has improved and the era of writing results is over. So now the parties are focusing attention on vote buying. Do you agree with that assumption?
I agree that to a large extent that is true, because, you know, in previous epochs, you didn't even have to buy the voters. If you can buy the electoral officials and confiscate the ballot papers and just fill them and stuff the ballot boxes, or even better in some cases, you don't even worry about the polling officers. You concentrate on the returning officer. And I mean, there was an election in 1983 in which you have a result like 500,000, then you add one behind it and it becomes 1.5 million. I mean, if you could do that, you don't even have to bother bribing voters. But it is true now, with the coming of PVC and card reader, you cannot really stuff ballot boxes, because if the votes are not accredited and electronically transmitted, then the votes will not count. So the politicians will have to use the few remaining means of election malpractice, including vote buying, which unfortunately is aided by the difficult socio-economic situation in the country.
That's a very good point. And Mr. Farotimi also talked about the messaging. Politicians trying to win elections by throwing out statements which in reality are hardly likely to be made real. Some of the biggest ones, I mean, he did mention this, but just, you know, people talking about lifting 100 million people out of poverty, or that we will end poverty. We had one of the political parties saying that, or, you know, whatever, but without looking into the detail of the huge problems that are going to emerge. Are we seeing that this time around in the promises that are made about this utopia that we would go into, which are completely false, of course, and after the elections, I mean, people scratching their heads and saying, well, we didn't vote for this?
I think one of the things probably that we should try to do in this election cycle is to de-emphasize those mass rallies where people, you know, you gather as many people as possible, just climb the podium and start shouting the slogan of the party. And that's where you make all these wild claims that will end poverty, will do this and that, without proper interrogation. But if the formats are different, for example, the most important civil organizations in the country, whether it is Labour Congress, some student bodies, some other groups, women groups like that, could invite the major candidates to a smaller, more closed session.
Like a town hall meeting.
Like a town hall meeting. Then they will now have to speak specifically on the program towards whether it is women or youth or others, and then it can also be interrogated with questions. And the other one is also television interviews, newspaper interviews, and debates. Those ones will force them to make specific, and what they say could be interrogated, but otherwise, if it is just mass rallies, like we usually dominate our campaign, you just shout any slogan. In fact, your supporter will not even let you finish. Whatever you say, they will say, yes, yes, that is true. And that's how it becomes difficult after the election to pin anybody down to any promise.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And the other guest, Abdullahi Abubakar Wali, who is the national president of the Nigerian Youth Organization, was talking about the youths and how he thought they were, although they're supposed to be driving change, but they're being ignored by the other political parties. And he thought that was sort of ill-judged and might ultimately hurt them in the elections. What do you think of what
I heard what he said about, the youth are not among the prominent candidates presidential. Part of it has to do with the presidential system itself. It is very difficult for a very young person, to become the presidential candidate of a major political party, because you need a record to begin with, and all the necessary contracts and the visibility. You have to be known all over the country. I mean, it's not easy to be elected president under this system. You need to win a quarter of the votes in 2/3 of the state. For that, you need a lot of contracts and visibility, and you can't get that very early in your life. Probably a parliamentary system might have provided more opportunities for young people, but still we keep working to improve the situation, because it's not just the presidency. You see, before young people can be qualified to become major contestants for the presidency, you should hold other positions, whether it's legislative or at the local government level, commissioners, even ministerial or heads of important agencies. You have to do that, because we can't just make you president just because you are young. I mean, we need to know what you stand for, what is your record.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've just got about a minute and a half or so left. You've seen, elections. You've analyzed them, looking at all the objective indicators, if there's any such thing in Nigerian elections. Do you think that change is on the way in 2023, or is it likely to be a little bit of more of the same, as it were?
Honestly, there is a lot of work being done by some political parties and some civil society organizations to improve things, beginning with the system of the elections and the processes and all that. But possibly it is too much to expect a very radical change in the 2023 election. But we should do it incrementally. If we can get some improvements in the next election, then by the 2027 election we could get even more improvement. But to insist on a sweeping change in the next 4 or 5 months might be difficult to realize.
Okay, on that note, Mahmood Jega, I want to thank you very much indeed. And he is, of course, an Arise News analyst and former chairman of the editorial board of Daily Trust newspaper. That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja and Lagos, bye-bye and thank you for watching.